I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and today we're comparing the Toyota RAV4 and CHR hybrids. If you're looking for a new Toyota hybrid SUV, no doubt you will have been taken in already by the RAV4 Hybrid. It is the most popular SUV on the market here in Australia, and as we found out in the past, that's for a good reason. We've lived with a RAV4 Hybrid long term, and we found that it represents really good value in the mid-size SUV segment while delivering pretty amazingly low fuel economy in the real world. The only real catch with the RAV4 is that it's very, very difficult to get your hands on one at the moment. They are so popular that supply of the hybrid in Australia is extremely tight. So if you've rocked up to a Toyota dealership, you may have had the salesperson suggest the CHR hybrid as an alternative. That's a smaller SUV than the RAV4, so obviously it's not going to be as roomy or practical, but in today's video, I'm going to be helping you decide whether or not you should at least consider the CHR if you can't get your hands on a RAV4. And in fact, as we'll find out in today's video, there are a bunch of things that the CHR does better than the RAV4 that you might not have considered. Now, the two that I've brought along here are the RAV4 GXL Hybrid, two-wheel drive, and the CHR Hybrid in GR Sport guise. But no matter what CHR Hybrid you buy, they're all the same price, and that price is about $2,000 less than a mid-spec RAV4. And as we'll find out today, the CHR Hybrid is actually a fair bit nicer inside than the mid-spec RAV4 too. But in today's video, we'll go through the interiors, have a look at the boot space, discuss the running costs, and then drive these two Toyota hybrid SUVs to see which one is best. But before we get started, make sure to hit subscribe. Here in the cabin of the CHR, the first thing I want to make really clear is that the CHR is not a baby RAV4. These two vehicles do share an underlying platform, so there are some similarities, but the development story of the CHR was completely different to the RAV4. The RAV4 is very much a global car for Toyota. It's a very, very important car. It competes in the most popular segment here in Australia. But the CHR was originally intended to be a Toyota Europe product. It wasn't even meant to come to Australia. It wasn't even meant to go to America. In fact, those two markets signed up for the CHR really late in the piece. And the result is that the CHR is a vehicle that was designed to compete against Volkswagen, Skodas, Ford Europe product, Peugeot, Citroën. And so what you get as a result of that is a really high quality interior, a much nicer interior than what you get on most Toyota products, if I'm being honest. In fact, if you covered up the badge on the steering wheel, the cabin of the CHR is more similar to a Lexus than to most Toyotas. That starts with material quality. You get better stitched leather on the steering wheel, leather-like material on the dash, really soft doors, and the fit and finish is absolutely spectacular on the CHR. Everything is screwed together extremely well, and while the cabin is quite tight and driver-focused, it just feels like you're in a more luxurious product. And compared to the RAV4 GXL, which is similar to this car on price, you feel a lot more special here in the CHR. And I think that's something you'll notice if you sit in the two cars in a dealership. Now, as I mentioned before, this is a CHR GR Sport. It's the same price as the CHR Cobra Hybrid, which is the other hybrid in the CHR lineup. But here in the GR Sport, we get these sports seats, which have a mix of like fake Alcantara and leather. They are nicely stitched, you get a little GR badge, but they're manually adjustable. If you go for the Cobra, they're similarly manually adjustable, but they're all leather, and you get power lumbar, which you don't get on this particular car. The other thing you get on the Cobra, which is nice, is Toyota's Nano E moisturizing climate control system. Again, a Lexus feature, but here on the GR Sport, you don't get that. You just get regular dual zone climate, which is perfectly fine. Now on the technology front, not everyone's gonna love this really prominent floating touchscreen up here, but it is 8 inches. The software on it is intuitive. You get wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto and 6 speakers. And then looking ahead, we have more traditional gauges, really nice binnacles that they're located in, and a clear enough 4-inch TFT display showing my speed and a few infotainment options and safety settings and the like. Really small steering wheel, feels great in the hand. This steering wheel hasn't been used on any other Toyota product, so it's actually quite unique. And then in terms of practicality, we've got a cup holder here, another one up here, a decent sized center bin, okay sized bottle holders, but you're not going to get a litre in there. So it's more tight, it's more driver focused, but the quality in here is super high. In fact, one thing I'll quickly point out is like, unlike almost any car at this price, the CHR has nice little plastic covers to cover up the body colour from inside the car. That is a real mark of a luxury car, not a mainstream car, just a small thing, but something that I consider important. Where you pay a price for the CHR's radical styling is here in the back. The actual amount of room on offer is pretty good for a small SUV. For myself, it's 6 foot, headroom is fine, legroom's good, tow room's really good, and even the center seat is usable because the floor is pretty flat. But as you can see, whoa, I've got like a door right next to my head. It's pretty small and claustrophobic in terms of your view out. The rear window is tiny. And then you're missing common amenities back here, like rear vents and a center armrest. So while we do have dual map pockets and bottle holders in the doors, you're left thinking that the CHR is really designed for couples. Maybe you've got a pet to put back here, or friends or kids occasionally. Whereas the RAV4 is more of your pragmatic family car with a bigger back seat with a better view out. But that being said, if you don't actually need a backseat with regularity, then the CHR may be fine for you, but it is definitely a factor to consider. Jumping in here to the Toyota RAV4, and immediately I feel right at home because I drove one of these cars for almost 6 months. But the one that I had was the top shelf RAV4 Cruiser, which is really the RAV4 that everybody wants. But of course, that car is the best part of $50,000 on the road, and the CHR we have over there is just over 40. So to make this comparison fair, I've brought along the mid-spec RAV4 GXL. And it's quite interesting because the step from the base RAV4 GX to the GXL isn't that big in the cabin, but then the step from the GXL to the Cruiser is absolutely massive in terms of perceived expense. And that's because, the GXL is pragmatic and it's acceptable in the cabin, but a lot of the finishes have a bit of a touch of rental car to them. So the seats, for example, they're comfortable and supportive, these cloth seats, but the pattern in them is just a little bit pedestrian, and compared to that kind of stitched leather and Alcantara setup that you get in the CHR, it certainly feels like a one level below in terms of perceived expense. Then, and I've banged on about this many times, so I'm sorry if you're bored, but the fact that the GXL at over 40 grand drive away has hard door plastics front and rear, not to mention exposed paint color in the doors, which the CHR doesn't have, is just unacceptable. And it's really hard to think of another midsize SUV that makes that mistake. But thankfully, that's where the negatives pretty much stop, because the cabin of the RAV4 is really well thought out. So we have this small little steering wheel, leather wrapped, all the controls are nice and easy to see. We've got really clear analog gauges in the GXL with a 4-inch color screen between them. We again have an intuitive touchscreen, the same screen as the CHR, the same size, 8 inches, but because it's a bit further away from us, it does look a little bit smaller. But you also get wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, plus navigation, which you don't get on the GX. Now, the materials on the dash are all quite nice, and you get cool features like this shelf for odds and ends. You also get wireless charging, which you don't get on the CHR, always a nice to have. And then down here, we have controls for the drive modes and a trail mode for the all-wheel drive as well. In terms of practicality, really big cup holders, good bin between the seats with 2 more USB ports, fast charging ones, and slightly bigger bottle holders in the doors than the CHR. Plus, as you can see, it's just a roomier cabin. The box down here for your legs is bigger, so if you have a larger frame, you're going to find the RAV4 a little bit more roomy than that CHR. That's especially the case in the back seat, and that's where we're going to go next. Compared to the CHR, which is, I guess, more of a funky hatchback-styled SUV, the RAV4 is much more conventional, 2-box, wagon-like shape, and so that means we have a bigger back seat and a much bigger view out, as you can see. So for myself at 6 foot, headroom is really good, legroom, honestly about the same as the CHR, maybe a touch more. Tow room, equally very good. And just like in the CHR, the middle seat is usable because the RAV4 has a fairly flat floor. But what it has is more stuff. While those door trims are still rock hard, we do get air vents back here across the RAV4 range. We get 2 more fast charging USB ports, bringing the total for this car to 5, which is great. We get a flip down armrest with cup holders. Interestingly, there's no map pocket on the back of the driver's seat, but there is one on the back of the passenger seat, and there's even bigger bottle holders in the doors. So as family transport, where the back seat is going to be used a lot, the RAV4 naturally makes a bit more sense. Here around the back of this very Smurf blue RAV4 GXL, we can get a sense of just how much bigger this vehicle is. It's 21 centimeters longer than the CHR, so it's comfortably in the next size up. But it's also 6 centimeters wider and 12 centimeters taller, so a bigger car in every dimension. Now here on the mid-spec GXL, unlike the flagship cruiser, we just have a manual tailgate, but it opens up to reveal a very spacious boot. Now there's a dual level boot floor. You get 542 litres if you go for the raised level where you got no load lip and a flat surface when you fold down those seats, or 580 litres if you drop it a little bit lower. And underneath that boot floor, you'll find a space saver spare wheel, but in the remainder of this boot, it's fairly featureless. No storage cubbies, but we do get this fairly flimsy cargo blind, and then shutting the door, it's actually relatively easy. Around the back here of the Toyota CHR Coupe High Rider, in case anyone's interested, we can see that the styling is definitely more dramatic on this smaller Toyota SUV. Now this one in particular is a GR Sport. It's the same price as the Cobra Hybrid, which is the other hybrid option in the CHR lineup, but you get a lower stance, you get sports suspension, and you get this GR styling package, including those very attractive kind of chrome, smoky 19-inch wheels and Yokohama Advan tires. Now, in terms of boot space, it is smaller than the RAV4. You were expecting that. I've already got big and small in here. Midsize has to miss out because the literage is 318 litres. That's quite small, actually. Something like a Volkswagen Golf has 381, the RAV4 over there has 580, so you are sacrificing quite a bit of boot space by going for the CHR. That being said, if you don't actually have to pack this thing full of stuff all the time, then it's a usable enough space for a weekend away or something like that, or for a couple of suitcases, as I've demonstrated here. Underneath the boot floor, we've got a space saver spare. And unlike the RAV4's boot, we actually do have a little cubby space off to the left here. Now, manual tailgate is all you can get on the CHR. It's a little bit heavier, but really no sweat. Last step before we take these SUVs out for a drive is to compare the running costs, which are really quite similar for the two vehicles. Now, the CHR behind me, Toyota claim it uses 4.3 litres per 100 kilometres of fuel, largely thanks to that hybrid system. And in our testing, it does use about 5 litres per 100 Ks reliably. It's one of the most frugal small SUVs on the market, in the real world at least. Now, servicing for the CHR, the intervals are 12 months and 15,000 Ks, and the first 5 services, so 5 years and 75,000 Ks, are priced at $200 a piece, meaning a 5-year servicing cost of $1,000, which is actually very, very cheap for this segment. Insurance, in the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer spent $887 to comprehensively insure a new Toyota CHR. Of course, everyone's situation varies and your premium will vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live, how you garage the car, who drives the car, and their driving history. Now, the running costs are marginally higher on the RAV4. We'll start with insurance, for which the same spiel applies. Everybody's situation varies and everyone's premium will vary. But in the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer spent $994 to insure a new Toyota RAV4, so a little bit higher. Fuel consumption for the RAV4 Hybrid is rated at 4.7 litres per 100 Ks for the two-wheel drive and 4.8 for the all-wheel drive. And in our testing, they'll do around 6 litres per 100 Ks pretty consistently, which again is very good for a mid-size SUV. Servicing is a touch more expensive for the RAV4, same 12-month, 15,000 kilometre intervals, but the first 5 services are priced at $215 a piece, for a 5-year servicing cost of $1,075. Still pretty damn cheap for this class of vehicle. And the warranty on both models is 5 years on unlimited kilometres. So in this company, how does the CHR Hybrid differ from the RAV4 Hybrid? How's it better? How's it worse? Right here behind the wheel, because we've already gone through the cabins. We all know that this car is smaller, it's a bit cheaper, but you get a slightly higher degree of standard equipment and fit and finish because we're at the top of the CHR range here in the hybrid, but the driving experience is actually remarkably different between these two cars, despite the fact they do share a number of common components because they both use Toyota's new generation architecture, TNGA, in similar flavors. But a lot of the reasons that the CHR is different in a static form also inform why it's different out on the road. It's a smaller vehicle, it's a lighter vehicle, it's more nimble and agile, but actually the development priorities for the CHR were really different. This looks edgy, and it was designed to be a bit edgy for Toyota, you know, a unique, sporty, coupe-esque crossover concept, something to give Toyota a vehicle to compete a bit more squarely with some of the cool looking cars that you get on the European market, your Citroën Cactus, you know, Peugeot 2008, vehicles like that. Because actually this was meant to be a Toyota Europe product. A whole bunch of the development was done in Italy, and that's quite unusual for a Japanese car. So whereas the RAV4 is that real world market car, still really good to drive and a big improvement over the last RAV4, the CHR was always destined to be something a little bit more special and a bit more driver focused, and I think you can tell that from here behind the wheel. But I'll come back to ride and handling in just a sec. First of all, let's talk about the engine, the hybrid system, because it's a lot less powerful than what you get on the RAV4. So we actually have an older hybrid system here. It's not the Dynamic Force, which is the newer series of Toyota combustion and hybrid engines. Instead, we have a 1.8 litre petrol 4-cylinder engine with a smaller battery, a smaller motor. So combined output is 90 kilowatts, which is actually a little bit more than you get in the non-hybrid CHR, which uses a 1.2 turbo, which again is quite unusual for Toyota. And a lot of people think that the standard CHR is really underpowered. I actually kind of like flogging it, but the hybrid gets along really quite nicely, particularly because it's a fairly light car. So the 1.8 litre petrol engine on its own makes 142 Newton meters of torque, and then the electric motor's torque sits on top of that. Toyota don't say exactly how much torque the motor produces, but by the seat of my pants, it's around 200 Newton meters total, and that's plenty in a car like this. It's never going to set any land speed records, but nor does it feel slow getting out and about. So even though the RAV4 makes a whole lot more power, and it does have a more swish and sophisticated modern hybrid system, the CHR is still pretty good, in my opinion. Now, it's also extremely efficient. So it uses a litre to a litre and a half less petrol per 100 Ks than the RAV4. So you'll easily do 4.5 to 5 litres per 100 in the CHR without even trying, and that's pretty darn frugal for any combustion fueled vehicle these days. But it's really the ride and handling that's special. Whereas the RAV4 is perfectly adequate and adept on a country road, the CHR has so much more poise and so much more communication from the chassis. It's a real delight, and I'm not just saying that. Talk to any kind of car guy who has driven a lot of the CHR or spent a lot of time behind the wheel of a CHR, and they'll tell you this is one of the SUVs that they would actually be able to get behind. I know Ponch has the same thinking as me in this regard. Lovely steering, a little bit heavier than you'd normally expect in a car like this. Lots of connection to the front wheels, multi-link independent rear suspension, double wishbone in this car like a Lexus UX. So you get a whole bunch of feel and feedback and compliance from really both axles on this car, and it loves an Australian country road, just absolutely loves it. So you can drive this car harder, more athletically than the RAV4 before it starts to give up on you and chuck the stability control up and whatnot. You're also in this lovely tight driving position. It feels sporty. Okay, yes, GR Sport on this particular car is largely, you know, an accessory pack, although we do have the GR Sport suspension, but it doesn't feel that much firmer than regular. They're both actually really compliant and pleasant to drive. Yeah, you know, it's just a really, really pleasant little effort, this car. Very European inspired. Small, agile, easy to park, and then a lot of fun as a driver too. Safety wise, we've got AEB, forward collision warning, lane keep, lane trace, blind spot monitoring, and just a standard reversing camera. So all in all, pretty good. But keep in mind that for some reason, the GR Sport does not get parking sensors, probably because its bumpers are different and they couldn't be bothered doing parking sensors for it. So there you go. If you go for the standard CHR hybrid, that's a feature you get. So the RAV4 hybrid is bigger, it's more sophisticated in some ways, it's more powerful, and it costs more than the CHR hybrid. So do you get more? Is it worth making that step up to the RAV4 hybrid? And I guess more pertinently in Australia, is it worth waiting longer for the RAV4 hybrid? Because we know that supply is tighter for this bigger Toyota hybrid crossover. Well, depending on the kind of driving you do, the RAV4 hybrid can absolutely be worth that step up. If you're the kind of person that would really benefit from the additional power, then you are going to notice a difference in the RAV4 hybrid. So when I used to run one of these as a long-termer, I found that when I needed to drive interstate or in the country, the extra punch of the RAV4's hybrid system really helped. And I think it's a bit of an urban myth that the RAV4 hybrid only gives you any extra benefit in town. That's not true. It is capable of accelerating on EV power at low speeds, but even when you're at highway speeds, you still have the electric motors available to provide extra torque to the combined system. They're still there, even though the petrol engine's more likely to be running more of the time at highway speeds. You still do get that electric assistance underfoot. So compared to the standard petrol RAV4, just the 2-litre base petrol, the hybrids are quicker everywhere, including when you're overtaking. But that's also the case if you just look at the basic petrol engine in this 2.5 litre hybrid system in the RAV4. First of all, the engine is bigger, 2.5 litres versus 1.8 litres in the CHR. It's also a newer Toyota petrol engine, but the petrol itself produces much more torque, 220 Newton meters or a little bit more, and that's before you add in the electric assistance, which adds up to probably another 120 Newton meters or so. To me, by the seat of my pants, I've always thought the RAV4 hybrid produced about 350 Newton meters of combined torque, but we know that power is 160 kilowatts for the two-wheel drive and 163 kilowatts for the all-wheel drive. So no matter how you paint it, it's a much more powerful car than the CHR. Now in town, just nipping around the burbs or commuting, that doesn't make a difference. You're never really getting up to full speed on city roads. The CHR's heaps, that's more than enough. And then even on country roads, the CHR doesn't feel super slow. You just have to keep the momentum up a little bit more. Here in the RAV4, it's that more traditional Australian family car, 160 kilowatts is pretty decent, and you never really feel like you have to push it that hard. The engine can get a little bit loud when you're under heavy throttle, but most of the time you're just benefiting from that fill-in torque from the electric system, a bit like it's a turbocharged SUV from another maker. But on the ride and handling front, the RAV4 is also quite different. It feels bigger, it feels more soft and plush. It certainly doesn't have the performance edge to it that the CHR does. Even a CHR on standard suspension rather than the GR Sport trim feels pretty taut, pretty stiff, and not uncomfortable, not stiff in terms of brittle or rough, but just one piece. The car moves as one, and it's really quite pleasurable to drive. The RAV4, it can certainly boogie if you want it to, but it has more of that relaxed family car demeanor to it. Its limits are a bit lower than the CHR, it's less driver focused. Even things like the pedal box down here is much bigger, more spaced out. So it does have that sort of relaxed, compliant vibe to it. The suspension is notably softer, there's more body motion, not so much that anyone would get car sick, but you could just tell the bias is towards family comfort rather than driver focused sportiness, which is kind of what you get from the CHR. So you can choose what your priority is. Of course, it's a bigger car, it's a roomier car too, and it's even more refined than the CHR. It's really quiet in the RAV4. They've done a great job of that. And on the safety front, we've got a bit more tech. We've got front and rear parking sensors. We've still got shared features with the CHR like adaptive cruise, AEB, lane keep assist. However, the RAV4 doesn't yet have junction AEB, which is one area that we assume will be updated quite soon. Similarly, here at the GXL, we've just got a reversing camera. It's clear enough, but not a 360-degree camera. And of course, there's the fuel consumption, which is higher than the RAV4. When you look at it as a percentage, the RAV4 Hybrid uses 30% more petrol than the CHR, but you are getting at least 30% more space, and at around 6 litres per 100 in the real world, the RAV4 Hybrid is still a very frugal car for the class that it competes in. So bringing it back to my original question in this test, should you consider the CHR Hybrid if you've already got your heart set on a RAV4 Hybrid? I think absolutely yes, you should. For some people, the RAV4 Hybrid makes a lot of sense, particularly if you plan on doing road trips, highway driving, country touring. The extra power from that 2.5 hybrid really does make a big difference. That being said, around town, the CHR Hybrid is absolutely punchy enough, and then even when you take it out on a country road, it demonstrates amazingly good ride and handling, even more sophisticated than the RAV4. So ultimately, while this video is not sponsored by Toyota, Toyota have kind of done the buying public a bit of a solid in bringing these two hybrid SUVs to market, because they're both good value cars at their respective price points and their respective segments. For me personally, my heart actually says CHR, because I love a lighter, more agile, more European style vehicle, and you can really tell Toyota mainly had Europe in mind when they engineered the CHR, and I like that. But that being said, having lived with a RAV4 Hybrid for many months, I can see the pragmatic value in that car as well. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.